questions. And let's see, I'm just seeing a couple of messages pop up, so I want to make sure I'm uh, seeing how things are going. Oh, let's see. It looks like it would be helpful to send the Zoom link to our email address again, if possible, just to the group email. Um, and are you all seeing my screen? I'm not used to being the slideshow sharer, but here I am. So
We can see it, yes.
great. Well, I will kick us off then. That reminder, I haven't done it yet myself, to change your name in Zoom to include your pronouns and your role in the coalition. Let's see. Well, I'll do it when I'm not sharing my screen, I guess. Well, Dr. O's not here tonight, is she? So I guess I'll read this one. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is a land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the first peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, Clackamas, Kalapuya, Multnomah, Wasco, Cathlamet, Tualatin, Molalla. We also know that many other tribes make their home along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they made. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area, the Grand Ronde, Siletz, and Cowlitz. In addition, I'd like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who's been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve families and students representing more than 150 different tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal. So, to kick off our meeting tonight, the agenda is pretty short. I appreciate you all being here. Welcome to tonight's meeting. We're going to review the draft report. We'll talk about the submitted feedback. I see that many of the people who submitted feedback are here tonight, so we won't necessarily go through that point by point. We've sort of pulled it aside in case it was submitted by folks who were unable to attend tonight, so that we have that for consideration too. But those of you who are here, we'll just let you speak your own feedback. And we'll discuss additional thoughts and pull together some of the comments that have come in so that the writing team has a robust and thorough view of the feedback that's coming in, and we can have some consensus on how this report will go to Claire so that she's able to put together the recommendation for the board. So in order to do that, I'll just quickly review our group agreements. To stay engaged, speak your truth responsibly, listen to understand, to believe, be willing to do things differently and experience discomfort, expect and accept non-closure, take space, make space, ensure each person in the room has a chance to speak, and respect each other's voices and views. I have high hopes for a productive meeting tonight. And I think, let's see, I'm going to stop my screen share for a minute so that I think the next thing is to just do a brief review of what's in the report. Much of it is things that we are very familiar with. The part that's basically presenting information about what the recommendation actually has in it, and then or what the proposal has in it, and then the pieces that are our recommendation and things specifically around implementation are the pieces that we'll be focusing on discussion tonight. So I don't know which writing team member wants to kick us off, and if you want to share your own screen or have me just share the report and be in charge of sort of scrolling through it as needed.
And Beth, do you mind if I just say a few words?
Oh,
Because
please
I need
do.
to leave early, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to be here until for 45 minutes, and I'm unfortunately really bad at scheduling and also saying no, so I'm doing like another thing at 7, a school board, a panel on school board members. But I just wanted to appreciate everybody in the moment, the Southeast Guiding Coalition and the work of the coalition. I know as community members it's hard, and you give up having dinner with your family, which sometimes is a kind of a good thing too. It's like, I'm sorry, I've got a meeting tonight, you take care of dinner. But in reality, it's a really tough job. So I want to just appreciate you in the moment, your dedication to doing life and this work over and above what your daily lives are. I wanted to call attention and appreciation to the agreements number 4, 5, and 7, your operating agreements. I think those are really great, especially around understanding who's talking and sitting back and listening to understand. I also want to really recognize the staff and appreciate the staff whose jobs it is to shepherd like all these herded cats for this project, especially to Claire Hertz, who should have retired 4 months ago and is still here. She should have seen her last day and had her cupcakes and her whole like the cupcakes, the roasting, the whatever, the well wishes, probably in December, and she's still here with us. So Claire, I want to appreciate you. I especially because this is hard work. It's not like it's hard work, and you should have retired on your own timeline. And then I also want to thank the community members that have given their time and their comments, and your input makes the project, the outcome stronger. I really appreciate. I have a high tolerance for conflict. I've learned through this. Like none of this bothers me at all. This is like the discussion, the arguments, the process piece, the dissenting voices is really, really important. It's what drives and creates these outcomes that work for most people, which is, I think, what we're aiming for. If everyone on both sides or all sides are equally like a little bit upset, I think that's a win. So I just, again, want to appreciate all comers to this work, because I know you have other things to do with your time at night. I know this is difficult. I know it's difficult to think of other people's kids in this process, but I think that's really important in creating the city, the community, the educational community that we want to see. And it does require a little bit of discomfort from all of us. So I just want to thank you and let you know I'll be leaving at 1:45. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much for being here and adding your voice and those kind words.
I was going to suggest if you want to share the document, that might be the easiest.
Okay.
Let's see who we have from the right. So we have Eddie, we've got DIC. I know Sarah might be late. Well, why don't we can just sort of, so this, our vision for this, I think the writing team is driving the rest of this. Oh, first of all, thank you to Director DePass and Director Brim Edwards in particular. I know you've taken so much time to come to so many of these meetings, and I know I've personally, and I'm sure all of us have really appreciated your perspective when you've added it, and also just the fact that you've been so engaged in the work, and so just really appreciate it. For tonight, this is going to be pretty informal. I mean, and I think everyone who's actually here are folks who've shared feedback on the report already. So I think we've all read it. But really, what we want to do is just share a little context about what we're trying to accomplish with this report. And then, as Beth said, we can provide a little more context, especially around the implementation section. And then we just want to hear and discuss feedback, and that will go for as as long as or as short as there's discussion, and then we'll recap next steps before the end. But coming out of this, we'll continue to refine the report with the goal of getting it to Claire. Eddie or Dee, anything? I mean, would it be? Sorry, we should have prepped more for how we're going to handle this. But would it be helpful if I just sort of share a little bit of framing, and then maybe we can talk about some of the sections, especially the implementation one?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're trying to achieve in this report is to produce something that's going to be accessible to for board members, but also for the public, and just sort of recap the highlights of what happened here, right? Sort of just be the historical record of what we did. We're not trying in the written part of the report to capture every single detail of what's in the F3 proposal, but trying to summarize the key elements of it, because we're going to have lots of things attached to this that explain exactly what the boundary changes are and all that. But trying to explain the process we went through. We're going to name that we didn't achieve a consensus or a majority opinion on everything, but we're going to try to list what we agreed on, what we didn't, where we landed in terms of the proposal that got the most support, and then try to help people explain the process we went through to arrive at that, like how the different pieces are connected. And we have a whole section that sort of explains the different decisions we made to arrive at where we landed, sort of in order, and why it had to be in that order, just so people understand how all the pieces fit together. Because I think the temptation when people zero in on one piece of a proposal they don't like is, well, let's just change that. But we want to try to help people who read this understand it's not as simple as just changing the one piece you don't like, because that has this cascading effect. So we've attempted to capture that in one of these sections. And then we want to include a section about, and this is where we hope we can try to speak with maybe even more of a consensus voice than we achieved on the sort of proposal itself, around, what's it going to take to implement this well, given some of the challenges in the short term, and then maybe in the long term to try to capture some of the slightly longer term issues that we've discussed a lot during this process, and make some suggestions to the district and the board about how they can navigate those. And so we've got this divided into an executive summary, which tries to summarize all of this, and then a detailed section on sort of our scope and process, that sort of rationale that I talked about, walking people through step by step how we arrived at our decisions, and then a section on implementation. Eddie, do you want to? I know Sarah worked on the sort of key decision points piece, but I think that's everyone who's come to these meetings is really familiar with that. But Eddie, do you want to? And Dee, do you want to share a little bit about the that implementation considerations section? So I think that's where we want to focus the discussion tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. Dee and I worked together to try to organize the last section, implementation. And, honestly, if it were up to me, I would have put this as the first section, because I think a lot of us agreed that, we, as a writing team, kind of like what Andy kind of alluded to, we wanted to kind of reflect the reality of the situation, which is that, not everyone really was very satisfied with the final proposal, F3. I mean, there were some parts that we were satisfied, some parts that we felt like needed some work. And so this part is kind of the third section, I know it's labeled section 1, is kind of the part where, after listening and getting feedback and just from summary of all the sessions that we've had, what are the things that would make F3 kind of stronger? And these are kind of outside, a lot of these things are outside the purview of SEGC anyway. So like things that probably we would want to ask the board to address, or even mandate, hopefully, for some of these, to kind of push F3 into what we felt was a healthier place. And also, things that like Andy said, that it felt like a majority of the SEGC members supported or would like to see. I don't know if Dee is here, if you want any more to add, or Andy. I guess I'll just go over the sections. So we kind of, this section was originally like 4 or 5 pages long. It was ridiculous. So we try to break it down and try to really just simplify and summarize it into just kind of main points. And we kind of divide into 2 sections. Short-term implementation just means like things that wouldn't require, kind of going back to the SCGC or redoing the whole redistricting process. It could just be as simple as just a policy or a mandate or something that maybe the board could approve. So that's one. And then the second part, long-term implementation. These are things where it would take, things that may take multiple years or may have to revisit the whole boundary work again. For example, looking at Inner Southeast, the schools that were excluded in the first round, that would be a big ask. And so that's why we put it into this section. And then I guess this is also all this technically outside the SCGC, but the last part, definitely things that are not something that the SCGC could really do or decide on, implementation recommendations outside our scope. These are things that I think were mentioned in meetings before, and we put it in here as like, these are things that would help alleviate some of the burden that were placed on specific groups that would have to make sacrifices in the final proposal. And then, last, we kind of left section 2 as a place for further discussions if people wanted to add. We're debating whether to put it into like an appendix or something like that, or even just summarizing some of it here in the last section, where if people want to go in depth into the reasons why some of these were important. I think I'm done.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not muted. Okay. So I'm wondering if, since we may spend a good chunk of time on the implementation, if we want to go through and kind of, there's a lot of comments that have come in, and some areas people want to discuss earlier on in the document that are maybe, like, some of them would be like really simple adjustments, and others might be require a little more conversation. Should we, I sort of see it working one of two ways. We could either sort of do breakout rooms where we've got a group who's working on talking about implementation stuff, and then another group talking about these other sections and areas that want to be addressed, or we could just sort of move through in order and deal with the quick response ones right off the bat, and then sort of have those conversations that require a little bit more discussion just as we move through the document. Or do we want to start with the implementation because we think that'll take the most energy?
I mean, I'm also curious so I know Beth is here, for example, left some comments, or if anyone who's took the time to be here, like, are there any reactions or things you feel especially strongly about, either that you left comments on in the document or just would want to share as general feedback? And then, I'm sorry, I think, and I'm happy to go to what you're talking about, Beth, too. I'm just curious sort of what people's reaction is here.
I see Sam's hand up.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'd like to react immediately if I can, and just, it's all there in my comment, but I'm just puzzled as to the let me say it this way. We spent the last meeting, everybody had all these impassioned pleas about opening, excuse my emotion, sorry, about opening the Inner Southeast schools, and that's, you guys boiled it down to the second recommendation with one sentence. And you guys spent all this real estate before that talking about CSS. Feels like a hit piece, doesn't feel accurate. Using language like refused and protect. I'm just not a fan of this section at all. Let's see what else. I think it's inaccurate about the choices giving to the Bridger students. I'm under the impression that they can have a K-5 experience and then move to a middle school, but someone can prove me wrong about that. We actually offer them a couple of choices, which is nice. It provides a unique model. There's also other K-8 models around Southeast, Sunnyside, Winter Haven. So you could include those by name if you want to have this have any metal. And like I said, it's just interesting that after all this, that's the first long-term one, and this whole thing about inner southeast schools is sort of blown over. Again, it just feels like a malicious intent. Feels like we're being singled out. I just don't understand what the like, what do I say back to my community after this? I say, well, it's interesting. We may never know what the status of our school is because I'm apparently signed on to this majority decision that Eddie just said you guys felt like was the majority. Is it? Is there a vote that says that that's the majority decision? Because if it is, that's great, but it's a shame. It just feels icky to me that this is like so many lines in a document that you guys are trying to make shorter. And it's just to provide so much uncertainty for my community that there's this appendix that's like, well, everything's fine except for there's this weird thing at the end where we may be evaluated because it seems like there's this large populist movement to make sure that somebody looks at CSS as something besides a K8. Please, like so much effort. It's like, can someone please do this? And we just want to know why. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm making a note here. We'll revisit this section. I saw Chris's hand next and then Director Brim Edwards.
Hey, Chris, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was
There you
trying
go.
the space bar trick to no. What I had to comment doesn't respond to what Sam just said. Are people who have their hands up people that want to respond to that, and do you want to, adjust the order so that we can be topical, or how do you want to handle that part?
I think I only see Director Brim Edwards' hand up. Did you want to respond to Sam's comment directly, or?
No, I had a different topic. So,
okay, so go ahead, Chris, and then.
Sure. Great. My only comment is that first off, I really wanted to thank the people that did the writing because I just appreciate what a big job that was, and it was clear and I could understand it, so I was really grateful for that. So thank you all, writers. And secondly, where there are places where it's mentioned that Harrison Park, there may be some mitigation for Harrison Park. I didn't see in terms of should they be losing, the things that the things we don't know about what will happen around enrollment and what Title I will be. I guess my hope is that whatever happens to Lane, that it won't leave them worse off than they were before. And I know that we're making an important assumption that getting the numbers up, and I totally want this to happen, and I think it's a great thing, will totally benefit us. But we hope it doesn't, I hope with the hand that gives it that doesn't take away some of the supports for our students that will still be there, but will be a smaller percentage that are very high needs. So that's just my encouragement that might be a part of the recommendations as well. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm taking notes here so that we make sure we address all these. And okay, Director Brim Edwards.
thank you. So I didn't know that Chrissy's going to say that, but I echo what she says as well. But the question I had for the group, and it doesn't need to be responded right now, but I've had some questions from the community about the recommendations from the coalition, and they've been pointing to the what's on the website, which looks like you've already submitted your recommendations and made a pretty concise statement about what needs to happen. And when I look at just the quick skim through the report the draft report that I just saw, it seems there's different points of emphasis. And I guess I know what will come to the board will be from staff, but I would just encourage it will create, I think, community confusion if there is sort of a divergence between what the PPS website says you all are recommending and I guess maybe what I'm hearing is, and just what I'm just saw was a little bit more nuanced. So I hope that's a topic that the leaders of the coalition discuss, so that we don't, when things get to the board, there's a disagreement about what the coalition, like what actually happened. Just because I think it will be more difficult for the board to discern. Of course, we'll be getting a staff recommendation, but also like what the cumulative result of the long process you all have been through.
So when you say the what you were seeing today, are you talking about this draft that's like here on the screen, that there's discrepancy between that and what's on the like PPS enrollment balancing website?
Yeah, so I'm just like, it's basically, it says last week the Sites Guiding Coalition, held their final meeting to select a proposal. They voted to recommend the program location and boundary changes described in more detail. I just think it's more nuanced than that. At least my observance of the last meeting, and I think that should be captured in order for, because it sounds like your report is going to have more nuances to it, and I just think it would be useful for whatever it is that the coalition is recommending to staff that be, because it sounds like you all are already done with your work and there's been a recommendation made. And that doesn't seem like that's not the case yet, and it seems more nuanced, and I think the nuances are really going to be important.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we were surprised by that too, frankly. I mean, that's the question for staff about that, where that message came from, but I had a similar reaction. I think it's a good point though.
Yeah. Well, it's discussing the coalition's work, so I think it's important that there be alignment with what you're doing with what's being reported to the general community. Otherwise, a lot of questions are going to come back to you or to the board with like what happened to this nuance that was recommended, or not, from a really diverse group that wrestled with some pretty tough issues.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that would be really important to make sure that all the public documentation of where we're at in this process is in alignment. Beth, I see your hand up, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, so I was just going to respond to a couple of the comments that I posted, just so we can have a dialogue, or questions can be asked. I think one of the first questions that I asked was about the legacy policy. Very beginning, it says, well, with an effort to allow as many students as possible to remain in their current school through the final grade. I think that's one of the things that I've been hearing throughout this process from a lot of community members, is that because it was separated into 2 phases, there are multiple changes, and students are, they move to one school, they maybe move to another school, and then, and that's in a couple of years. And so I think it's important for us to identify that legacy policy, or a way for students to request that they stay in the same school to finish out that final grade, is important. So I think it's important for us to bump up that a little bit, because that's a pretty critical point. One of the other comments I had was on I think the next page, talking about the major roads. We talked about 82nd Division and Powell. I think those are definitely great. Please add Cesar Chavez to that one as well. And then I think the last one I wanted to talk about was just a comment. And Beth, you and I've had this conversation a couple of times. It was in the short-term implementation recommendations, and this is specifically related to Cruston. So obviously, I'm interested in that one. But it was about adjusting the boundaries along Cesar Chavez, where Grout and Cruston basically cross over. In concept, I 100% support that. I think the challenge is the immediate implementation of that. And I think it's like 20 to 25 kids that Cruston would lose. and we're already under that 270 mark. And so I think that would be a really big impact immediately to the school. So if there's a way that, yes, I think that's a great idea. If there's a way that we can help support the community in balancing that, or a commitment to, I know there's no money, so this is a big request, but a full-time FTE equivalent to help support that, where 270 mark would be, because we're talking about losing professional staff in that instance. So I think that's something we want to talk about, and I have no idea how it impacts grout. I think that's something we'd want to understand before we put that out there. I think Flo ran some numbers too, Beth, is that right?
Yeah, and so this doesn't so there's outcroppings on both sides of Cesar y Chavez. So it's that big chunk that goes to the west of Cesar y Chavez that's currently part of Creston that would then drop the enrollment there. And that so yes, that would be good to have a little clearer understanding of what we're asking for there. I think that some of the stuff when we talked about that was looking at just the parts that were on the east side of Cesar y Chavez and only considering those areas because of that exact reason. And that I believe, well, I'm not going to throw out a number, but well, yes, thank you. I've got that written down.
And then I think one of the asks that I put at the end was something that I heard from multiple communities, and that is we're doing a lot of shifting, and this is something that we're all going to be working through. And I think one of the challenges that people are really struggling with is when they're being asked they can literally see a school across, like outside their window, and they're being asked to go, a mile or two away to go to a new school. If there's a way for us to allow families to petition to go to a school that's immediately adjacent to, their home, whether it's allowed or not, but if we give families the ability to ask and to raise, hey, this is a hardship because of XYZ, I think that that's something that would really go a long way in gaining support and having families understand the impacts it would have on them. So
I do think that is allowed in the current petition process, but maybe making that really explicit to families.
I think that would be really helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thanks. And I also wanted to start out by echoing appreciation for the tremendous amount of work that everybody put into this. It was an interesting year-long process. And to that point, I think I really appreciate Sam's comments and how they sit on him, right? It's like it, and I think one of the things I would say is part of his experience, like how that's sitting on him also is, and I don't want this to be interpreted as speaking for him, but it's a reflection of how we ended up sitting with the process. And I think that there was a lot of discomfort with the outcome of the process that is articulated really nicely in the report that you guys wrote. One of the things I would request is that we need to debrief what happened with this process. I think it's one thing for us to say, here was our experience of it. I think it's another to actually have a formal sit-down conversation and say, here are the things that went wrong in this process and where it broke down as a participant. And here's what PPS staff needed out of this process as well. I think we all needed things we didn't get. I think it's especially important for us to do that work in light of the fact that we're talking about repeating these processes throughout the city for other areas. And we can do better. I think we can do better by having, one of the things that struck me at the end of this process was how it's one thing for people to disagree and to have a healthy disagreement and argument. But one of the things that struck me as an outcome of this process was how people just felt like they'd been participants in something that didn't feel good. It didn't feel like it was at a standard that we felt like we wanted to support. And I think that's really different than saying we disagree with the outcome. And I think we need to get at that, because I want PPS in these processes to have credibility. I want PPS to have long-term relationships and supporting constituents and all of the families. And I'm not sure we got there with this, and I think we can. So I think before we start doing this again in other parts of the city, we really want to look at what broke down and what we can do better.
Thank you. So that would be like a suggested implementation bullet point, or
Yeah.
yeah.
And one other thing is when you talk about transition, I think it actually is really important to look at what's the transition plan for every constituency that's impacted. I think in any of these scenarios, we have about 2,000 students that are going to get moved around on some level. And I think it's really important to be very specific and say, here's the school, here's the community in this school, here's what's going to happen to it, and here's how we're going to manage that change and support those families through that change. It's a huge high level of investment and work. But if we're able to support, if we're able to do a really structured and detailed change management process, we can lessen the pain of change for a lot of people.
So as I'm looking at the list of attendees here, I just want to make sure to step back and open the floor to any folks who are here who haven't had a chance to speak yet. If there's a particular area of the recommendation that that you'd like to provide some feedback on, or have thoughts about, or really support the way it is currently, or whatever comments you might have, I just want to open that invitation before we move forward.
We can also come back to the creative science point if that would be helpful, since
Yeah.
Eddie, I know you and I had a brief conversation with that, but we could share some more context there. I think the feedback is good feedback, but yes, I agree. Let's open the floor for anyone else before we come back to that.
All right. Well, do you want to share? You said, Andy, you said that you and Eddie had sort of discussed this point a little bit.
We emailed briefly about it, but I mean, Eddie, I don't want to put you on the spot. Like, do you want to share briefly the context where we're going for there? Or, I mean, I'm happy to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Sam, for sharing. I think that's very important to hear if you're still here. I think the issue here was, it's complicated, which is, maybe part of the reason why this is so long, and it probably shouldn't have been that long. But it was one of those situations where, the whole idea of there's a lot of frustration early on when looking in general at focus option schools, and how the Southeast is really filled with focus option schools. I mean, we were talking about Winter Haven, Sunnyside, and those are K-8 models, yet PPS is moving towards a middle school model, which is counter to this. And, I don't think it was intentional to single out Creative Science School. I guess the point of kind of specific to this process was that when we were asking to look at CSS as through K-5 configuration, it was kind of refused early on. And I think when we were talking about it, that was one of the points where, for example, F3 could have had healthy enrollment for Harrison Park as a CSS K-5 configuration. We also had issues where in the early proposal A, B, C, whatever, trying to find a location for CSS, the decision to keep it at K-8 made it so that there was less options in terms of where to place it. And so I think this was one of those, it wasn't necessarily, I don't think it was meant as an attack on CSS, but it was one of those kind of turning points in kind of the process about where there was a lot of kind of, wanting to model or even explore or even just have a discussion about, if we could reconfigure CSS as with K-5 and how that would give us more options and probably better enrollment for, especially the populations that we're supposed to be centering in this process. I don't know if I got it all. I don't know if you want to add more, Andy. But yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so two things. One, I think we need to be really precise where we're, because some of the stuff came from the feedback we collected. I mean, this was several weeks ago, right, where folks submitted ideas for implementation recommendations. And there are some things that clearly have, almost near unanimous support, and there's some things that have, like, a significant number of people raise the issue. But we need to be precise as sort of what level of support these things have. I think I think to your point, the point about the inner Southeast schools, I mean, that's the closest to unanimous thing that I've seen come up in the coalition. So I mean, I think elevating that one maybe to the first point could make a lot of sense. On this point, I think what we were trying to capture was the sentiment from, I don't think it's a majority, but like a significant number of people that should we have to come back and take a look at this again?
You don't think it's a majority?
Okay, yeah. So So what we're trying to capture here is not to recommend any particular change, but the sentiment that should we have to come back and look at this again, as some of us are worried that we may have to do because we didn't consider the inner Southeast schools, among other things, that before we get too far into a process, or if this is relevant in another part of the city, I'm not sure if it is, that we're clear on the implications of maintaining a K-8 school and the middle school enrollment in there as we're opening 2 new comprehensive middle schools. And like, just factually, like, what are the implications there before we start getting into proposals of how that limits or doesn't limit our ability to achieve the enrollment balancing goals, and the fact that we didn't really have that. So it's not recommending a change. It's sort of noting, like, this would be important information to have if we have to come back to this down the road. Because one thing we're trying to do here is capture, like, what are the things that could have happened here that might have allowed this to go better and that could be relevant next time, whether it's in Southeast or somewhere else. So that was the spirit of it. But
it doesn't say
I hear
that.
you on our
It doesn't
needing
say that at all.
to revisit the language there. Sorry, go
It
ahead.
says, does this item to reevaluate the decision to protect the K-8 status of Creative Science School have widespread support among SEG members?
We have not taken a vote on that, so I don't
The
think.
document says that the majority of these items have widespread support among SAGC members, and our number one long-term recommendation is one sentence.
Yeah.
Reevaluate the decision to protect the K-8 status. So what you're saying is you disagree with PPS's protection of we as the SAGC majority disagree with PPS's protection of Creative Science Schools K-8 status specifically.
Okay.
We can't say that has majority support, and there's a comment that got
what the document says. And
Yeah,
if
so
I
Sam,
was part of this, and was just a member of the CSS community and read it, I'd say, why do they have it out for us so much specifically?
I think that is a very fair point, and that language will be changed. I think you've made it. That's really
okay.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I also think what I heard Andy say about the inner Southeast schools, that definitely was something that we heard from a majority of members, and changing the order of those for sure makes sense. And I had a question for you, Sam. If this point was sort of refocused, I just put this in a comment in the document, but if it was sort of focused more on the idea, kind of like what Andy was just saying about the overall focus option review and understanding the impact of the K-8 focus options embedded within an overall middle school model as part of a process piece, how would that land if it was taken away from the specific focus on CSS that was sort of intended to be an example of how it played out in this process? But if
again, to echo Elizabeth's point, we are, my math may be wrong here, but we have the most displaced students of this entire process. And we are the first victims of this decision. So again, this is further, like, we just feel really beat up. We feel like people think we're the impetus instead of us losing our home being the impetus for some of these decisions. A, I want to say that. B, switch the order, I guess so. This is just like, this recommendation has so many backup points, and you guys want to add a hyperlink with like further data. It's just there's so much effort on this point. And what's the hyperlink, by the way? But you can answer that after I answer your question, which is yes, very much so. You could say all of them. You could say K-8 focus option schools, you know, and not like have it be this thing where it's like, I understand that it opens up the math, but like, if we're not talking about any of the math here, like, it's just so much. It's just so much on us.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally, I think that's totally fair, that the point is there has not, that looking at the implications of, or the, what's the word I'm looking for? Looking at how the interaction, maybe that's a better word, of the focus option enrollment and boundary neighborhood and the boundary and enrollment balancing processes, it's just a challenge. And if that is going to be happening, I mean, I remember saying this during the DBRAC process, so many years ago now, that before we go into boundaries, we've got to figure out what is going on with focus options. It doesn't make sense to be doing it within. So maybe if the recommendation is more like address the focus options and decide what the plan is for that, and we're not recommending what it is, but make sure we know what the implications are before we're changing boundaries.
And my last beef is just that with the whole thing about like, for further discussion with this hyperlink, it's like, geez, wow, this is like big in-depth discussion here. Like, does anything else have a hyperlink in this document? What's the hyperlink? I'm unaware that there's a website that talks about how much of a problem this is. Is that a link to a discussion on a Discord or something?
No, I don't know what the hyperlink is
Well,
either.
Sorry, Sam. I think that was my fault. I think earlier discussions we were wanting to add hyperlinks everywhere, and I think I just haven't deleted or I just started adding in.
So the thing is, just like for an in-depth discussion, including the issue that this would all be fine if we would just acquiesce. Please see that. I just don't like it. It just seems like y'all are going after a particular institution in this document. But
so
thanks for taking my feedback. I'll stop talking.
No, I thank you for bringing it to the table. I appreciate it. I think we'll definitely address that.
Yeah, can we? Right. So I think Eddie, we should probably follow. Like once we edit it, we can happy Sam to follow up like individually too. I mean, the other thing I was going to clarify also for anyone watching. So again, this is a draft. And there's a comment that got deleted in the beginning where there's a reference to like sort of majority support where it was like, this is aspirational. Like we have attempted to come up with some things that we believe the coalition will endorse, but that's one reason we sent out that survey and are having this meeting, right? And so we will be sure to, like, as we revise this and get to the final version, we will be precise about things about the level of support we can confidently say certain things have, and there will be another opportunity to review this. And I think we can note, even as we make this a little bit higher level, like we talked about, we can also note in here that there's differing perspectives on it, right? And so we're not. I mean, so I appreciate you raising it, but also wanted to clarify that we are going to be as careful as we can to capture where there was agreement and where there was not, both on the proposal in here and also on this recommendation stuff.
Thanks very much, Andy. I appreciate it. Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Beth.
So if anyone has a particular place they want me to scroll to in here so that we can discuss, sorry if I'm making anybody seasick with all my scrolling back and forth here. Let's see. We had a couple of, I kind of wanted to touch on what Beth brought up about the legacy policy and then the follow-up in that next paragraph about minimizing additional disruption to outer Southeast schools. Do we want to talk about, I don't know. I mean, the legacy policy thing is an interest. I mean, obviously that's a board decision, and I don't know that I don't know. as a coalition what people are thinking in terms of stronger recommendations about that or not. Eddie?
Yeah, I generally agree with Beth. I think maybe the reason it wasn't really put in there as much is because we haven't really had a chance to kind of model, different outcomes. I mean, I remember the presentation a while ago, one of our meetings where it was talking about, these are the number of years it would take for the legacy policy to follow through, and unless it really caused major under enrollment in a lot of places, then the board could revisit it and shorten the legacy policy. But I think that was part of the biggest kind of reason it wasn't included or expanded upon that much, is because we don't. Yeah, it may help a lot of families, but it could also cause a lot of disruptions for some other schools as well.
I appreciate the request for clarity on that second one that's highlighted here, the minimize additional disruption. Beth, you're saying like specifically, don't ask families who are moving in this process right now to move again if you're doing this again in 2 or 3 years. So I don't know if we want to be more explicit about that.
Well, I agree with Eddie that it's all a balancing act. If we shift all the kids at once, then we get the enrollment numbers that we're projecting. If we do a slow shift, which is, I think Judy, you presented that and showing over the next 5 years how that happens. It's a ripple effect, whatever we do with legacy policy. I think I think giving families an option for discussion or an ability to say, hey, my kid just moved last year, now you're wanting me to move again, or my family moved home so we could be in this area and now we're shifting. And then you're asking us to shift 2 years down the road and we don't know what's happening with high schools. I think there's just so many unknowns still, because this is one step in a 200-step process. So if we allow families to have a discussion, to be able to submit something that might work for them, I think it's going to go a long way in the supporting process.
In terms of the writing team and what's going to be most helpful to you in terms of finalizing this document, I guess that's my question. What would be the most helpful way to proceed in order for you to be, are there questions in here where it's like some things that you want us to really hash out so you know which direction to go? Or do you kind of, based on these comments, feel like these are things that you know how to move forward on?
I think the stuff where folks have left comments and the stuff we've discussed tonight, I think it's pretty clear. I think I'd like to make another effort to, maybe after we do another pass through this in the next day or so, to go back to the group and say like, hey, really, we would love, we know you spend a lot of time on this, but please give this, especially the implementation section, a read and let us know what you think. I'd just like to hear sort of more feedback generally. I don't want to assume that silence equals agreement, I don't know, Eddie, Dee, Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think you said exactly what I was thinking. The implementation part is kind of the hard part. I think the idea was to see like, a lot of us weren't really happy with F3, and just kind of wanting this document to kind of reflect that nuance. But what are some things that maybe could push it to where we can be happy? I mean, maybe not totally happy, but better, in a better position. So yeah, if anybody has any additional like recommendations, they would would love to hear it. And also just the part after too. I think I left a placeholder there for further discussions. I don't know if people really have a lot to say. We're talking about putting more in-depth discussions in like kind of an appendix type of thing, so people who are interested or curious could look that up. But I personally don't want to write a 20-page paper, so maybe I was hoping to put that on other people as well. But yeah, otherwise the comments that's coming in so far, like on the right hand side, those have been great.
Yeah, so I think maybe after we have a chance to regroup and address some of these and again, kind of do another pass through the whole thing. We'll send out another email to the whole coalition, sort of recapping, here's the stuff we've changed since last time, and make it another ask for feedback, or just even a general sort of this generally feels right, or no, I have serious concerns on the implementation stuff in particular.
I submitted the comment that's that last bullet point there about the transition of Lent, and I don't know. That's one that I feel like is really important, but I don't know what to recommend. So I don't know if that's something that we just need to. I don't know if there are some specifics that anybody could offer in terms of like what might be good to include there, or is it just really important to be clear that that transition plan, along with other transition plans, as was mentioned earlier, but is a really important part of the process.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Think about what it is you want to see at the end of the transition. Like what are you hoping for? And maybe emphasize those values or outcomes for students. What kind of conditions do you want to make sure are created? And then actual specifics might arise from that, but at least we will have that. We will understand what it is you want to see in place. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't have the inner workings of implementation, of what's available, to come up with a specific menu.
Like a question I have in particular was based on a conversation that was shared with me with speaking with a Lent parent whose older children, or I think maybe third grade child, was in the neighborhood program and was concerned about having to leave the program or leave the school, and saying, I want to stay in this school regardless of what the program is, whether it's DLI, but that child hasn't been in DLI, and what supports or what options are there for those families. And so I know that what we've talked about is, those students would be transferring to Marysville. And so my question is that the only option? And what work could be done with families at Lent to find out what their needs really are and how they would feel best supported, and then what the district could do to just sort of provide that for them, whatever it might be. And I guess also along with that, I was wondering about, since this doesn't start until not next year, but the year after, are ways that for next year for DLI, so that fewer neighborhood students are going to be going into second or third grade having come through an English only program, so allowing more students to be already integrated into DLI by the time it has transitioned.
I can say that these are all ideas that we're already trying to bubble up and work on as we can, knowing that we actually don't have, in the absence of the board's decision, it's still tentative, right? So we can't do hard marketing around change until it's approved. But there is some synergy and that would be even stronger if those ideas of like, where possible, allow students to remain in their current school, where possible, allow students who to access the program and make the transitions early. And maybe that's too general and doesn't, yeah, I'm not trying to put words in your
Yeah.
mouth, but
Well,
but
that
I
actually,
think, yeah.
that actually brings up another point that I'd heard from community members earlier on, where, you know, if they've got an incoming sixth grader next year who's, so rather than starting at Hosford, if they're a Woodstock neighborhood family, maybe they would want to start at Lane next year and have their full, you know, begin that transition early. So maybe if we did have some explicit language around some of those things, just making them more transparent to community members that this might be an option that you could, this is something that you could consider. This is whether or not it's like already possible, but that to make that really clear to families that they have those options.
And I think that level of detail, that high level, is still, that's enough for this document, right? I mean, I think, in fact, I think there's even something about where possible allow students to remain. Like, we can draw that out more, I think, in this implementation section, because I think that was one point I know there was agreement on when people submitted their initial ideas for implementation recommendations. So maybe it's just pairing those two things, like where possible, find a way to allow students to remain in their current school, but also where possible, allow anyone who's interested to, to move to what their new assignment would be early. With the understanding that it's not going to be possible in every single case.
Yeah.
And then obviously the board will decide exactly what the policy is, and you guys will have details. And then maybe I think we should stress too the importance of, because I know we have communication called out specifically around the Lent Marysville transition, but like just communicating generally sort of the timeline for implementation and what people's options are, and focusing on that once we know what the policy is going to be. So like, here's our recommendation, high level, and what it should be, but also let's prioritize clear communication, at the, district level, but also at the individual school level on what options are. Be good.
All right. Well, so I want this to be productive for people. I don't want to, would it be helpful to folks to be in like a group of 3 or 4 to sort of, would that be a more comfortable space to sort of bring up some of the things you want to discuss? Or I know we've got a lot of people who are here and you made the time to be here, and I don't want your voices to get lost. So I want to know what the best way for to make sure everyone feels comfortable participating would be. Or if you feel like, I don't know. All right.
Yeah, Beth, you're doing great. I think we have such a small number of
Yeah, I was going to.
here,
Yeah.
and those who are actually able to talk, in such a small number. I feel like this is kind of our small room discussion right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that way. I'm just listening a lot. I've had COVID, and so I'm sorry my participation kind of fell off the last week. But I think you guys have all had great input.
Maybe not to throw like a negative spin, but if there's anything in here that people feel like they're not, I mean, I know we had a great robust discussion about the CSS bullet point, and we'll address that. But if there's other things in here that feels like I'm not sure whether that belongs, or if there's anything like that, we definitely want to hear about it and have a chance to have that conversation. Alrighty. Let's see. There was one thing that I was just looking at, which was the in the bullet point about opening the inner southeast schools to the enrollment balancing process. It specifically talks about Llewellyn and Dunaway and how that and the impact to Woodstock, Whitman, and Woodmere. And I put over in the comments, so Abernathy, Buckman, Grout, these are also inner southeast schools that are not part of, and Sunnyside too, that are not part of the current process. So I like Abernathy and Sunnyside definitely could have an impact towards Atkinson and Creston and Grout too. So I think maybe just, I don't know if we either want to not name any or if we want to name them all. I feel like, because it's not just that Woodstock, Whitman, and Woodmere that where we're sitting right at that 270. And anyway,
Yeah,
I just think about
makes
that.
me. Oh, sorry. I'm curious what others think.
I mean, Sunnyside's over 100% capacity.
I mean, I'm inclined to say that we should include them all. I mean, whether or not we refer to them generally as all of the Southeast schools that were left out or speak to them individually by name, I don't care. Just as long as we specify that we mean all the schools that we were not able to look at.
I'm inclined. I think the conversation about creative science, I'm reflecting on that too, and I feel like maybe making it higher level could be good, and we could still note, even if we didn't want to name specifically, although we could. But I just don't want anyone to feel, because I know we're not. These are not things that are in the proposal, but people who read this might worry that it is. So I worry if we mention specific schools that could cause confusion. But we could still note at a high level, like, okay, yeah, in general, a lot of us think we should just have done this process, or next time should do this process considering all the schools in Southeast. But if you wanted to right now, you could make a couple of very specific targeted changes with a couple of schools that were like, there are actual short-term things that in theory would be possible. So we could still name that at a high level, you know what I mean? Versus mentioning these two schools specifically.
Well, but I mean, I guess my point is, like, Sunnyside is another example of a very specific targeted
right
change that, and Creston, borders, Abernathy. So like all of them really could be a specific targeted change.
That's true. I get nervous about mentioning specifics around schools that where, like, to be clear, nothing we're speculating about here is actually in. Well, I guess we don't know what Claire's recommendation is going to be, but as far as we know, it's not going to actually be in any recommendation. I don't want to confuse people.
Yeah. So I in that way, I think, I don't know. I would almost say, I don't think it would be bad to name them all, just because we are saying Southeast. So here are the schools in Southeast that were not. I mean, well, but then it brings in. We're also not talking about Winter Haven. We're also not talking about Richmond. So
I think it might be more impactful, kind of take both of what both of you are saying, Andy and Beth, about, keeping it at that higher level. Like, yeah, this is a big issue, like excluding these outer or inner Southeast schools, right? And it did affect this work, and it is going to have these downstream effects. And then we could do, like, Beth, to include what you wanted, naming specific schools, but preclude that with the, for example. I feel like when people are given like specific examples, like, this is an issue here, or this should be fixed, or this could have happened, like specific examples, that makes it more real.
Yeah.
Right.
Even phrasing it like we could have that, even, I mean, yeah. I think,
yeah, I agree. Like, we need to clarify, like, this is not a proposal, but these are specific examples of where these excluding these schools really impacted.
Yeah, I like that idea. So I see a thumbs up from Sandra. She's on board.
Because the point, I mean, because again, like in this, the way we were thinking about this document was, next time there's a Southeast Guiding Coalition type process 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whenever, people are going to look back at this one and want to know what happened, and we want to try to capture, hey, like we think like the decision to include only this subset of schools had these consequences, and we just want to make sure that's noted. So that's really the spirit of noting it.
So this also, then the second bullet point under short term, so Hosford is highlighted, and I think, was it Beth made a comment about this, that it's interesting because Hosford is one that will be then under 500 in the proposal. So saying equivalent to what's offered at Kellogg and Hosford may not be the most effective comparison there. Maybe.
Yeah, and I also forgot to add Mount Tabor, because I believe Hosford
Mount Tabor and
are still
Hosford, yeah,
are in the
both
400s. And
yeah. And I don't know if this, so where, is there a place, this doesn't specifically address whether if Harrison Park or Lane fell below or were no longer eligible for Title I, right? Is that's in here somewhere though, right?
I think it should be, but I think that was going to be like the section 2 of this third part, where it says like concerns, and I think that was going to be. So like the way I think we imagined it was like section 1 of this part was about recommendations, specific recommendations, and then section 2 would be we still have these concerns. If that makes sense, it seemed like at the time a logical way to divide it, but now it all kind of seems blurry. But no.
It's up in the intro executive summary too, as like when it sort of summarizes like this proposal would accomplish these things, but then it says like many coalition members have concerns about the potential.
Uh-oh, we lost your voice, Andy.
Whoops. That means we should detail it down below as well, but
yeah. Yeah, so I feel like that would kind of fit into this bullet point. But yeah, I just don't know I don't know how we want to fit Mount Tabor. It's like we sort of have we have 3 different things going on, because you've got schools that are enrolled over 500 but may lose Title I status. You've got schools that are enrolled under 500 but are not Title I schools. And then Kellogg is has been getting Title I, and they're also questionable whether they would be able to keep Title I status as well, right? So I don't know. Maybe it's a separate bullet point that's just that question of how Title I status and resources are distributed and making sure we're meeting the needs of the kids who need it. And then the enrollment is something different. I don't know. But in any case, I don't think Hosford should be the comparison there, because I think they're probably going to be losing. They're not going to be as robustly staffed as Kellogg will be with only 475 kids. Whatever.
I think Hosford was included because it was like to compare to Hosford now.
Right. Yeah.
But your point makes a lot of sense.
Other stuff, guys?
I think Alyssa has her hand up.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. I just have can you scroll down a little bit, Beth, to the or I think you're controlling it, right? Yeah, whoever's controlling the screen. To where the implementation recommendations outside of the scope. You're right there, actually, where it says requires PPS to analyze and implement busing to ease the transportation of moving to DLI programs. Why are they different recommendations, I guess? It seems like they're not exactly the same, and I was just wondering if somebody could explain that.
I think the explanation is when you have a lot of people writing the same document,
Oh, it was like cut and paste situation, like one person wrote part of it and the other.
Yeah, a lot of it was, but I think part of it was there was issue raised. Well, I think one of the things was answered. Well, not answered, but in one of the meetings, where the Woodstock MIP was told that they would provide a bus from the Woodstock area to Harrison Park, and that was put in there just to make sure that that gets seen. And then the second part was something that came up later about Bridger SDLI students, moving 2 whole strands to Lent, and it seemed like there was a lot of community feedback about the issue of transportation around that. And so that was kind of like that really was its own thing, and that came a lot from kind of the feedback we've heard from a lot of. I'm guessing I can't speak for everybody, but from what we heard from the community from Bridger, I don't know if that answers the question.
Kind of. So are we advocating that like any student in DLI who's going to a new program be bused to the new program? I mean, I guess I'm not understanding why it would be different between Mandarin and Spanish.
When I'm reading through these bullet points, I hear what you're saying, Eddie, how these sort of came out of different processes, but it kind of feels like they're recommending the same thing, and that we could tighten it up by having that be one bullet point that then specifically says, Woodstock to Harrison Park. And I think the current, and Claire mentioned that the current strategy is that buses are provided for Native speakers. However, it's not only like if there's other kids who live on that bus route who are not Native speakers, they can also use that bus. Is that right? Am I understanding that right? So.
Yeah, it seems to make sense because currently the MIP program from Woodstock area, whether they're Native or not, shares the same bus to Hosford with the neighborhood kids. And so moving to a different school and not including the non-Native speakers is kind of like, oops, we dropped you off. But no, I agree. I think that should be tightened up and put into one bullet point. And that would be more effective that way. Yeah.
And they're both, because in both of those situations, like Lent being located where it is requires quite a bit of crossing major intersections for the families who don't live immediately around the school. And so it's kind of the similar issues for both. And thanks for highlighting that, Alyssa.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think it's more of a writing thing rather than a idea
content thing. Yeah.
It just is unclear when you're first reading it. Like it's just a little bit unclear.
Yeah. When you're separated out, it's like, is there a difference between these two?
And these are all things too, where once we're done sort of incorporating all these sort of substantive changes, we're going to make sure we have we're going to make sure we give the whole thing a pass just for these kinds of already issues.
Well, are there other questions that writing folks team have, like things where you want to hear from us in terms of how to move forward? Or
some of the, I guess I've heard a lot of concerns, but at least I didn't. I don't know can't speak for the other people on the writing team. Didn't necessarily put it in because we didn't really know how many people shared this concern. For example, one of the concerns, I think it was mentioned earlier as well, was also the high school process and the implications down the road. Another concern I heard, and I think I personally brought it up too before, was about who's bearing the burden of split feeding, and that should be something should be front and center in the next phase of the high school balancing. Things like that are things like that should be put in here as well, or other concerns that people have heard or feel is important to put in. That would be my question.
Yeah, I know the high school one has come up. That's been a huge thing in the community because in terms of I definitely think that not knowing what the high school plan is has made community support more challenging because a lot of folks want to know, like, if they don't know what this middle school assignment means for their high school assignment, it's hard for them to either get on board with, like, they'll make assumptions that say that mean it's harder to support it or it's easier to support it based on what they're assuming about the high school assignment. And so I don't know if, yeah, maybe that's what that section 2 is for, sort of like these hovering things that influence the process but aren't really part of a recommendation. So
Yeah, I'd say about 95% of the people that I talked to said, well, what does this mean for high school?
right.
So it was definitely on people's minds. And then I think there was also a question about the folks who are in a K-8 program that may be outside of their home boundary. Do they have to, is their school assignment for high school now reflecting on their where they live? And so that may change because of, there's a lot of unknowns, I think, with the high school component. And of course there are, because it hasn't been done, but that is a huge discussion in the community.
Yeah.
And Judy just came on, so I know she's heard it too.
I mean, it would be, given the community feedback we've heard, I feel like it would be just, regardless of what SCGC members think, it would be objectively accurate to note that, like, given community interest, concern, whatever word we want to use around the implications for high school, X, Y, and Z, you know what I mean? So that could be worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
I would say too on this note of like how, because I think those are a lot of the concerns I hear too about where does this path lead you for high school? And I think we could do well, I mean, my suggestion, it doesn't have to be in there necessarily, is I think you could also tie that back to the inequity of not including all of the schools, because it's not just about the shifts that are happening right now. It's also like years down the road. So it's like, when you don't include all the schools to go through that together, there's like multiple layers of worry for the folks that are getting shifted right now, and unknowns, and the possibility to go through this again really soon. And all the other schools that weren't included don't have that, like their feeder patterns are just set, presumably.
Yeah, so I think that one was a hit. Definitely something about high school. Yeah, and the other thing, just adding, is also, I think one of the struggles that as a writing team, writing this is, a lot of this is from memory about like what happened. I mean, we do go back and look up on some stuff and here and there, but like, so that makes it hard for us to make sure that well, I mean, there's no way to include everything, but a majority of big points are included. So yeah, if anybody has ideas like, oh yeah, this should be included, this should be included, like I think I'm saying it's better to throw it out there than to keep it in.
Like I said, we'll make another, obviously all of you in this meeting are hearing it, but we'll be sure to email the entire coalition with another ask once we have the next version of this, which will be soon.
I mean, I think generally you guys did a really thorough job with this, and like that table I was reading through, and I really appreciate, I know it's a lot to include, but for me, sort of understanding all of those pieces, like you were saying, and the interplay, how each decision impacts another, what things are sort of set off by different decisions that were made, and the rationale behind them is really, I think that's really at the heart of understanding where we landed. And to me, and then having it broken down in the table like that makes it really accessible too, I think, there's a lot of information to sift through. And so I appreciate that you took the time to do that. And I think, I mean, I love a good table. So for me, that's like, I love having that there.
Shout
And
out to Sarah for that section. Also, I think shout out to Kayla at PPS, who's been helping us a little bit with this too, for the idea of the table, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I agree. That's a good section.
let's see.
So
kind
I'll
of-
just jump on that and just say, since you said shout out for Kayla, she is here in the meeting. She's helping take notes. She's a contractor. She's not a PPS employee. She's a grad student who's been helping us with some of our weekly summaries and the like, but she is available to the writing team. So this final synthesis of all these pieces, she's ready to support you all. So if you're feeling like, oh, this was, 5 different people's ideas and I'm not sure that I'm the best person to synthesize them, she's on your team too. So if that helps you think, contemplate and frees you from feeling like you can't say something now because you don't know how to write it, maybe that's just wanted to put even more of a plug in for her support for your work.
Yep, here to help. Thank you, everyone.
Judy, can you refresh our memory on the or Claire on the updated? I know the timeline has shifted a little bit. Or like what's the latest timeline on sort of when this goes to the board and what that means for when this needs to be final?
We're working to have the goal is to have Claire's recommendation, she's here, be ready to go to the board on April 29th. Okay, so that's 2 weeks. As you've noted, there's a lot of important parts of what you all have done in this process and are ready to say that we'd also like to make visible as soon as possible. We don't want to speak for you, and we want your work to inform her work. So to that end, you've got a little bit more time. The initial timeline was like for tomorrow, and we know that's not happening. But if next can, I don't know how you're feeling about next week, and I'm sure that y'all kind of probably want to also get this wrapped up.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, so when we can, my gut is we should shoot to turn it around another version as quickly as we can, and then to give the coalition one final opportunity to see it, offer last feedback on a pretty quick turnaround, but we can sort of preview the timeline so people who want to make time can make time. Yeah, that's helpful though. Thank you.
I think we should have an understanding of the timeline tonight before we leave.
When would you like our final report, Claire, in a perfect world? That's not tomorrow. Late next week? Like what's...
Does it seem possible for the writing to have, I know you're meeting tomorrow, and then having the weekend, and then maybe by the end of day Monday, getting that back out to the SCGC?
That was
Does
what
that
I was
seem-
thinking. If we get it back out to the SCGC Monday, maybe depending on when Monday it goes out, either ask for, last thoughts end of the day Tuesday or first thing Wednesday morning or something, and then.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
hoping-
giving them 48 hours from there.
Sure. I'm
So out by Monday at the end of business, and then feedback by end of Wednesday.
Yep, and then we can get it to you by end of the week. Yeah. I'm hoping at that point, based on based on the feedback we've already gotten, that will be down to relatively minor, you know, things people are going to be raising. But I think it's good to allow one last opportunity. I think that sounds good. I don't know. I mean, Eddie, others, you know, Dee, Sarah, what do you think?
Sure. I think the sun's supposed to be out on Sunday, so it might be a slow day for me then, because I haven't seen the sun in so long. So
When it stops hailing, we'll take it as a sign that it's ready to.
yeah.
I think that sounds good as a tentative plan, and then you know, like Judy mentioned, we're meeting tomorrow, and we can confirm that, you know, tomorrow. But I think that sounds like a good timeline to work toward, and feels realistic to me.
I think when we do the 2-day little feedback turnaround loop on our revisions, we should just add something to the survey that's a simple box to click that just is like, I am fine with this as it is.
Yes.
And then hopefully we could just feel like we got some straightforward, like, cool, go forth and turn it in.
Yeah.
Feedback.
And we'll have a plan for anything we need to adjust if we don't have confirmation from some critical mass. Like if it's, I don't think we're going to get a mass, this is terrible, clear. Like I'm glad we cleared that hurdle, right? So I think it's just a question of like, can we affirmatively say, you know, a significant majority is, you know, good with this. And if we, in the absence of that, we'll make sure that, again, we're precise in our language on sort of what we're confident has different levels of support. So yeah.
And I think in that easy checkbox that Sarah's mentioning, maybe clarify that like I'm also okay with like non-substantive changes, because I feel like every time I do that where I'm like, okay, I got everybody's okay on this, and now I had to like tweak a couple things, and now do I have to check with everyone again before I say that they're okay with it? So maybe just in a clarifying language that I'm okay with this as is, and if there's any non-content related changes, I still sign off.
Yep. Right. I appreciate that comment, Carmen. And so I guess to clarify, this is feedback concern. I mean, yeah, like we're going to present the votes for and against the proposals, you know, right up front. I think we can also send an email to the whole coalition sometime tomorrow, just previewing that timeline and the next steps, since not everyone was here at the meeting. Can we make sure, to Carmen's point in the chat, Sarah, that, I mean, it may already be on that table, but like on points like that around Lent, where there's specific feedback from specific communities that we know disagree, we should make sure that's specifically noted.
Yeah, I think I appreciate how this captures, you know, the breakdown and the level of support that this proposal does have. I don't know. I mean, so then I guess that's a question is, do we, should it include sort of what the, well, I guess it does sort of, when we're talking about all the nuance, it's sort of, those are sort of the reasons why the people who did not vote in support are captured in some of all of those decision points, I guess. I don't know. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud.
I think the tricky thing to capture is like there's there was agreement on certain parts of of what went into these proposals, right? And then there were a couple of specific pieces that we got stuck on. So like, how do we?
And then, and we didn't, in the voting, there was no like, why are you voting?
Right.
Why did you vote for this over that, or nothing over something, or so we can't really say. But we do know from feedback why people did or didn't support certain elements.
Sounds like we have a plan.
Well, I don't want to keep people here longer than is necessary. So if we're feeling like we have a plan, I will sort of make sure we're still here. So if there's more that needs to be said or discussed, we do have this time now. So I want to make sure that people access it. But if we are done, we can be done. Should I put out a last call? Is there anything, staff, that you need to hear from us, or any last comments people want to make? Oh, not monitoring the chat very well. Let's see.
I appreciate everyone who showed up to this one, to the optional meeting, and who's still engaged this far along into the process. So thank you for the good feedback, and for like, it'll make the report better. And I think it's really important that we have that we document what happened, the good and the bad and everything as best we can. Because what I hope is that it's gonna help future work like this in the district, like the kind of immediate next versions of these processes in other parts of the city. And then, when this needs to happen again in 5, 10, 15, however many years, that we'll be able to produce something that, that'll help those processes go better. So I appreciate everyone for sticking with it and contributing.
All right. Well, I guess we look forward to hearing from you, writing team, in the next few days. And I hope everyone has a good weekend, and maybe we have a break from the hail. And I guess that's it.
Hey, can we just give it up for Beth? I mean, she stepped in to say, sure, I'll do this, and you did a great job tonight. And just want to woohoo!
Thanks. Well, I appreciate staff, all of you being here ready to support and step in with whatever we needed, and writing team for taking the reins on most of our discussion tonight. And to the board members who were able to come and continue to engage, really appreciate that too. All right.
Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.